All right, after a short break, we're back. And just as a reminder, we just got through talking about kind of your childhood years, and I think it's might be an appropriate time to transition into kind of past high school and grow up, getting to be a young adult. And kind of to start that off, one of the questions we had was, what was your first job or your first real job? Maybe there was jobs that you had before you're out on your own.
First real job. Yeah, well, the first real job was working in the bakery in Garrison, North Dakota. When I was in high school, I ushered at a movie theater. I guess that was a job. I had to show up and I got paid for it. And I was the guy with the flashlight that took people to seats in a theater and yelled at people for putting their knees on the back of the seats, and then the couple in the back corner. Quit that. So I did that, and I did that also in Minneapolis. I had a job in a theater that I did that. And but my first real job, paid job, the only job I had was in the bakery in Garrison, North Dakota.
How old were you when you were working in the theaters?
19.
Okay.
Just out of high school.
So working in the bakery. And something else we had in here. Do you remember when you got your first car and talk about
Sorry. So I want to hear about, maybe you're going to talk about going to baker's school and...
Oh, I had it a little later, but we could talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That was a good time to do it.
Going to bakery school?
Yeah, like what was your motivation to go to bakery school and what became of that? And
The motivation was income. No, when I worked in the bakery there in Garrison, Jim Jacobson that owned the bakery had gone to Dunwoody. And I guess I worked in the bakery pretty well. It was just pretty much a job. But it's one my father found for me when he went up to work in the department store across the street. And so he knew Jim, and I suppose Jim was Mason. I don't know if he was or not. But anyhow, that's where I wound up and worked in. And, I just started. I didn't know a pan from a plate, But anyway, I learned how, and I basically my job was to make the bread. And what they did was they used a sponge process, where the night before you went in and you mixed yeast and flour and water, and then you put it in a tub that looked like a bathtub. It had wheels on it, and you dump this thing in this tub and leave it ferment all night long. And then in the morning you'd go down and 100 pound. And then in the morning you'd go down about 5 o'clock in the morning and throw it back in the mixer. It's a big horizontal mixer that would handle 200-300 pounds. And you throw it back in the mixer, add more yeast and more flour and more water, and let it mix, and then you dump it back in the thing, and then you take it over and went a mechanical process of making the loaves, and then it wound up in the pans, and my job was to put it in the oven and then take it out of the oven. And little pans were four loaves in a pan. They're about this long. And you reached in the oven, and your mitts were a cloth mitt, had a hole cut in them for your hand, and it was on the outside of your hands. And you grab the thing and you take it and you shake it into a rack. And the first 3 months or so, it burns all the way up my arms. That's how you could tell I was an apprentice. And then, so that was my job. But anyway, that's basically all I did in the bakery. And then let Jim like me, and anyway, and he said, well, maybe you should go to bakery school. You should go over to Dunwoody, and I'd save some money because I was living at home, and I didn't want to spend any much money, and it wasn't too terribly expensive. So I got in contact with them, I suppose by letter or something, and went to Dunwoody. That's the motivation, I guess, was just, I suppose I saw it as maybe a life career. I mean, I knew people that were bakers for life career, like Alfred the drunken baker, but that's a whole nother story. We won't go into that. Alfred was, in Jamestown is, in North Dakota is where you went to dry up from alcoholism. And Alfred had been there 3 times. And one morning in the spring, I walked to work. Where we lived was only a block and a half from the bakery, so I walked to work. And I was walking to work, and I looked down, and here comes Alfred with his car, and the door was open. And well, that seems interesting. What he was doing, he had a 48 Plymouth, and he was looking out the door to see the stripe in the street. Then when he got to the bakery, he came in the back door, and there was a narrow hallway and a wall. He walked in the door and tried to walk up the wall. And then he went in the office, and he just sat in the office, and he was sweating profusely. He couldn't lift a 1 pound lift from here to here. And that's maybe one of the reasons I don't drink much. And so anyway, that's what I decided to do, and so I went and you get all the technical stuff. I still got the book somewhere, and it's, I still look at baked goods and say, well, they could have done this or they could have done that, but so that's why that was the motivation, I guess, and I think all goods are. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, so we're kind of down that path. When did you decide to stop doing the baking thing and move on to other?
Well, I went from Dunwoody to a Cox Bakery, which was kind of a statewide bakery in the state of North Dakota. And the guy that owned it had a P-47 World War II fighter plane. Not that that means a darn thing, but the bakery was a schmuck bakery, and I wanted to bake. And the way they measured, they used lard instead of shortening or other things for their, and you scooped it with you reached in a big tub of it, and you scooped it with your arm and threw it in the par. And that wasn't it. And at the end of the summer, they just came to me and said, you're done. So I worked at a pizza joint for a little while because I ran out of the bakery job. My father had moved to Bellevue, South Dakota, working for another guy that didn't want him to buy him. And he'd heard of a job in Rapid City for a little specialty bakery there. And so I went, I called him and he said, come down and interview. And we left North Dakota and it was blizzarding and about 15 degrees above zero. This was the 1st of April. And Karen and I were just married. And so we went down there to Rapid City and this guy had been to Dunwoody also. And he happened to be a Mason, but that meant nothing at that time. So I interviewed and he had me do some stuff and he said, okay, he said, you got a job. Well, when we pulled into Rapid City, with the snow and the cold weather in Grand Forks, it was 70 degrees on the main street of Rapid City, South Dakota. And I said to your mother, I don't care what the job pays, we're moving. We'd only been married a couple of months. So the nice weather was enough to motivate us to move. So I did that for a while, and I got in an organization called Toastmasters. I don't know if you've heard of it or not. It's a speaking organization. And the guy we rented the basement apartment from was a Toastmaster. And he said, well, why don't you come with me and see what it's like? I've done speech in high school. So I went and I got involved and had a little fun and was somewhat successful, just a club. And a guy named Baker came up to me and said, you need to be in sales. And remember, my father was in the clothing business and in sales, and that was my last wish, was to be in the clothing business. But I talked with your mother and I said, well, you know what? Let's give it a shot. They're going to pay me the same amount of money that I'm making in the bakery. This bakery I was in was a newer bakery and they refrigerated stuff. So you didn't have to go to work at 3 in the morning. You could go to work at 7 in the morning. Jeez. And you got off at 3 in the afternoon, and so you had the evening, and it was really pretty nice. But I thought, let's give it a try. And Karen said, yeah, fine, let's go. And so I went to work for him, and this guy thought I'd be a good salesman, and I was pretty successful at it. Until the missiles went out of Rapid City in 1965, 66, and at that point in time, our business went down, and I could live on my salary, but I really could live on my commissions. And the commission sales went away, and you know how that works. So that's why I made the change.
So sorry, just to back up. So back to Garrison, and you were a baker. Then you went to the pizza place, and then were you still living at home at that point?
No, I skipped through that pretty fast.
Oh,
From Garrison, I went to baking school. From baking school, I went to Cox Bakery
right.
in Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Oh,
And I was living with Addie Peg
okay.
in her basement. And then when that job went away, I was in my own apartment, paying my own rent, you know, and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, I'm without an income, and I don't have any extra money anyway. And so things were getting pretty tight. I was out of work about a month. And I went to the job service, and the job service said, well, there's a job in a big bakery over in East Grand Forks. And those cities just joined together. And so I went over, and they put me on the midnight shift, midnight to 8. That was not for me. But I did it because there was a salary, and then I kept looking, and this job opened up at Howard's Pizza.
Okay.
Howard Guckenberg, a good German in a pizza business. But pizza was just starting out. And we made a good product, and we were in East Grand Forks. Grand Forks, the bars closed at midnight. So everybody hot-footed it over the bridge to East Grand Forks, where the pizza joint was. There was a Mexican joint, there was another bar, and so on in the strip out there. And so we stayed open till 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, I wasn't married, didn't have anything to do, didn't make any difference. I was used to sleeping in the daytime anyway. So that's how I got to the pizza joint. And then after that, I was working at the pizza joint. I didn't see a future in it. Howard had a son that was going to work into it, you know, and so I was kept looking, and then I got the call from my father, and then I wound up in Rapid City.
So where was Mom at this time? Because you were dating.
We weren't married.
Right.
So Mom was in college at General Beadle State Teachers College in Madison, better known as Greenbelt Tech. And she got a 2-year teaching degree there.
So you were, in
I was
addition to
in
working
Grand Forks, she was in Madison.
But in addition to working these crazy hours, I'm imagining you're commuting back to Madison on a regular basis. Yeah.
Well, I did in Garrison. Garrison was a 400-mile drive to Madison.
Yeah.
So when we had a long weekend like this weekend, I would get in the car just as soon as I was done with my shift at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Hot put it to Madison. It took quite a while, 7 or 8 hours to get there. And then they let me stay with her at the house in a separate room. And then we'd do whatever we did for the weekend, and then I'd get in the car and drive back, because I had to be back at 8 o'clock in the evening to set the sponge.
And so this was 1958?
1959, 50, 60, 50, well, actually it was 57, 58, 59.
But you also, at about that same time, you were in the National Guard?
Yes. We met once a week.
So how'd that come about?
Yeah.
I joined the Guard.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah. This is a very busy
I'm
time.
kind of wondering, do you want to deal with this or do it later? We'll just do it now.
Just do it now, yeah, since we're in the fix. Yeah, we're already skipped all
We're
over,
at
but it's
that
good.
early stage of my thing. But in 1957, they still had the draft. And there wasn't much going on. Strangely enough, there wasn't much going on in the way of international incidents. But they had the draft, and I knew what my luck was. And I thought, well, I better do something. And you could join the Guard before January 1, 1957, and you didn't have to go to boot camp. And all the RA and all the other National Guarders, mostly regular Army, said, we don't want this anymore. We had to go to boot camp, so does the Guard, for more training. That was their argument. Well, the military said, okay, fine, and caved in. So I got in before that because the last thing I could see after I graduated from high school was winding up in July in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, at guard camp with some guy yelling at me. So the guard meetings in Madison were pretty laid back, and you just transfer. So in Garrison, we're basically Boy Scouts with guns. It was a small outfit. We were an engineered outfit, and so I was a cook because I was a baker,
Right.
and so that was good. And so I didn't really have to do much. I didn't have an M1. They were heavy, and they had a lot of recoil. I got a carbine, which was like a 22, and we never had to stand inspection at guard camp. We got to take our car and go into town during inspection. Not bad duty. And we got to pass the Jeep. We got to pass the deuce and a half, which is a truck, because they needed us there first to have the coffee and rolls. And so we didn't have to go out on night maneuvers, It was pretty good duty. So we did that, and then you just transfer as you move.
So from 57 to 59, you were in the Guard?
66, it's 63.
Oh.
So then I went to Rapid City. And then I was
Okay.
honorably discharged in Rapid City.
Okay.
And I've got the papers somewhere.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No benefits, but the papers.
It's just this time period was a little murky, and I was kind of
It is murky.
curious because I've heard all those pieces, but I never put everything together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like any organization you're in. If you move, you move with it. The secret is, in some organizations, you don't have to rejoin. And with the military, you have a little different. But we were lucky; there was nothing that went on. The only thing that came up was a Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy got that stopped, and the Berlin Wall, and the airlift, and that was Air Force, and the Guard wasn't being called up like they do now. So during the missile crisis, there was a Guard unit in Sioux Falls that was on the edge of being called, but when it was de-escalated, so really I was very lucky with all that.
So you really fell, as far as your eligibility for the draft and everything, you fell right between the Korean War and the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. I just always wondered, because you were kind of, technically could have been, you're right in that pocket you could end up.
If I hadn't joined the Guard, odds on I would have been drafted. And somehow I couldn't see myself in the regular Army or Air Force or whatever military branch.
Right.
Yeah.
Looking back now, it might have been okay, benefits and so on, but it never happened. You can't change it.
So you just made the logical choice to go that route. And that
So I
one
did
you
the
still
Guard.
served,
It was good. I don't know if it did anything shape my life or anything like that, but it was something, and it was. I think I got $17 a month or something for being in the Guard.
and a place to go on weekends sometimes.
Yeah.
To go play around with
Well,
the
we
boys.
didn't have weekend drills.
No?
When I was in Garrison, we had a weekend drill. We'd go down to Garrison Reservoir, which is now called Sacagawea Reservoir, and we had a float bridge company, so we'd inflate the floats, and we would take our Jeep and go over the hills because they didn't want us anywhere near that bridge. It wasn't bad duty.
Yeah. It's interesting. Just trying to think of what order to go in here. I had some other questions, or we had some other questions about. Let me scroll back here. So you talked about you were driving all over North and South Dakota. It sounds like. And I know that you've always really enjoyed cars and the cars you've had. What were you driving back then? What was your first car you had and all that sort of stuff?
First car I had was a 1938 Pontiac four-door sedan, six-cylinder, that overheated. It was owned by a little old lady, of course, and I bought it for the princely sum of $25. But the darn thing overheated. I bought it in the spring, my senior year, and of course it's hot and muggy in Madison, South Dakota, and you go drive Maine, and that thing would heat, and so it had the hinged hood, so I would open the hood and stick the edges under so the engine was exposed, and it was a little cooler, but I had to be cool because I had a car, but I wasn't cool, and the battery was under the front seat. It wasn't in the engine compartment, it was under the front seat under the wooden floorboard. And then the wires ran up over the frame to the starter. Well, the wire is old, the wires were frayed, and every so often I'd smell smoke, and the wires were shorting out against the frame. So I stopped, wrap a rag around the wires, and so I had that most of the summer, and I took it to the junkyard and junked it for $25, and that was it. My second car was a 1947 Ford two-door sedan, and that had a suspension problem, so you couldn't drive it over 45 miles an hour, which was safe. But in the front end was jarring. But I drove that through my senior year, and when I graduated, I bought a 1949 Chrysler New Yorker sedan. 133-inch wheelbase. When you got out of the door and walked around the car, you forgot why. And it was big and heavy and fast, and that's what I drove, because it was easy to drive and comfortable, and so I would drive it to Madison and whatever. I didn't drive around the state much, but the trips to Madison were much better. We had that car for, oh gosh, we were married in 60, we probably traded that in 61 or 62.
Of course, that. Kind of speaking of that, how'd you meet Mom? When did you meet Mom? When did you meet Mom? When did you start?
Where did I meet Mom?
Yeah.
In Madison. We were in the same class. And we had mutual friends, obviously, in that little class. And Keith Thomas Lydiard, if that doesn't ring a bell,
Yeah.
Was my buddy, and Deanna Talk was Karen's buddy, and Karen and Deanna would walk from school to the streets that was just north of the street. Karen lived half a block across the street from me. I think maybe I've shown you the house, but across the street from me. And so she and Deanna would go, and Deanna went the other way, and Karen went east. And so she would walk past, I would be out working on the car doing something in the yard. She'd walk past and kind of, hi, how you doing? And what you doing to your car? She'd never come over, but she'd walk and then she'd go over the house. And it was just, it was just kind of a friendship. We'd see each other at school in the class and so on. And that's kind of how we met. But it was never really any particular serious thing until prom. And I think Deanna came to me and said, you better ask Karen to go to prom. And I said, well, I don't know. I thought it was a junior prom, and I got burned, and so I didn't date much. One, I didn't date, and two, moving school to school, you don't really get really close to anybody. And so I thought, well, I'll ask her. And I did, and she said, sure. And so we went to a movie the week before prom, some terrible movie, but anyway, we went to this movie, and then we went to prom together. And that night, there was a porch on the house now, but there was a screen porch on the house then. So I took her home after prom and after they didn't have an after party. So it was maybe 12 o'clock at night or something. So I took her to the door and we really hadn't done anything. And so I said goodnight and she grabbed me and kissed me. Woo! Right.
Hold on, this is PG.
That was, that was the beginning of the end. And so we went together for 3 years before we married.
So she told the story, if I remember right, similar to your story, except that you were having a lot of flat tires, and happened to roll those tires by her house a lot.
Now you see, I'm blamed for something that's true, but my house was here, the gas station was there,
Right.
and her house happened to be in the middle.
See?
Now, why go around 2 or 3 blocks to get to the gas station when I can go straight past the house?
It's like you couldn't help it if all the girls are out looking at you.
Oh, that's right, and I'd forgotten about that, and it wasn't really overt, it was kind of covert.
Right.
But somehow it all got
Obviously.
together, and we were together 44 years, so.
Yeah. No, it's just a funny story.
Yeah, I never heard that before.
So that's how we met, and it was kind of from there on out, all that time, it was, we saw, we went steady. And she had my class ring, which I think went away in your times.
I think they still do that. At least they did when I was in high school.
So, so you started going out in 56,
57,
so not even until 57.
right before graduation.
Okay. 57, and then you left
Yeah,
in 50s, right after
right
graduation.
after graduation.
Wow. And then you had a long distance relationship.
Yep,
for
telephone and letters.
3 years.
There's a box, there's a shoebox somewhere
Yeah.
with letters. And I'm not sure you want to read them, but anyway, don't let your children read them.
Yeah. No, but that's interesting that worked, for a 3-year long distance relationship resulted in a marriage. And
Well, Keith and Deanna went together that long, and yeah, because they married also, and as a sidebar, and I wasn't, but Karen was the best maid of honor for Deanna. I wasn't involved, but Keith and Deanna were our best man and maid of honor.
yeah.
And so yeah, we went together, but that was, you didn't rush into well, you guys went,
Well, yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. It's just the fact that you were out of Madison for that long and
well,
kept together.
we just communicated somehow at all.
Yeah.
Right after I graduated and went to work for that, moved to Grand Rapids City, Garrison, and met, went to work. That was in the spring, right after graduation, and 4th of July, Wally Michelson, which was my buddy, he drank himself to death, and we were buddies, and so I contacted him and said, "Can I stay at your house on 4th of July?" Yeah. And so I drove all the way to Madison, and Karen didn't know it.
Oh.
But that was just after we met, had the date, and it was looking moderately and so I showed up at her front door. And, well, they had left his history. We just,
That's cool.
then we started, well, let's communicate, let's write, and when you call, phone calls cost money.
Well, yeah.
And so, holidays I'd call. Otherwise, we wrote once a week usually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did pretty much the same thing. Phone calls still cost back then.
The internet had not been invented.
These are a little different. How did you propose to Mom?
So what?
How did you propose to Mom? I'm assuming you proposed to her, not the other way around. Apparently she kissed you first. So maybe
Yeah,
this
so
is.
maybe, yeah.
I did propose. I've always had a little dry sense of humor, or a little warped. And so they came up for, what was it? Oh, Annie Peg. Again, I was living there in Grand Forks. And Annie Peg helped me pick out rings. And because I didn't know, she's a girl, she's a lady, you know, maybe she's single. But, okay, so we went to this drawer and looked around, okay, this one, and so I had them, so I bought it, and they came up for something, well, I guess I just invited them up, it was in the summer, and Annie Peg had this dinner for us because she knew what was going on. And so Karen's folks and Karen came up, and they stayed in the motel there in Grand Forks. And so we went out, and then afterward we parked somewhere, just holding hands. And
Of course.
yeah, believe that one. And so we never did get intimate, but so somewhere along through that thing, she was sitting next to me, and I said, I want my class ring back. And she said, what? I said, I want my class ring back. Real serious. And she started to kind of tear up. So I pulled out, why does that bother me? But anyway, so I pulled out the ring and said, here. Oh, okay, well, that's never been a sad memory, but.
Yeah.
So anyway, she went back and told her folks, and I went back to where I was living, and so the next day I went to pick her up, and they opened the door, and everybody was on their hands and knees. The ring was too big for her. She had the skinny hands like Caitlin has.
Yeah.
And they'd fallen off her hand, and they're crawling up to the damn ring. So that's how it was. And then we went together for, oh gosh, another year. And she got a job in Grand Forks teaching, and that didn't quite work. And so after that, we decided to get married in February '60.
Valentine's Day.
Yep. Had no excuse to forget.
And you got married, of course, you got married in Grand Forks then?
No, we got married in Madison.
In Madison.
And that was kind of a funny deal because we got married in her church.
Oh, yeah.
Lutheran church, and that didn't matter, but she was, they could vouch for her, they could sign for her to get on the marriage license. But I was in Grand Forks, so then I had to go and get a syphilis shot. They had to test me for syphilis.
What?
In North Dakota.
Yeah, that was pretty common back then.
That was a big thing then.
Really?
So I had to go get a blood draw in the hospital. But nevertheless, that's a sidebar. But we went, so they had to, on a Saturday, Pete had to go down to the, arrange to have the courthouse opened up so the clerk of courts could sell me this marriage license and have my name, because I wasn't 21. You had to be 21 in South Dakota.
It'd be at least 21 and no syphilis.
Yeah, I don't think it has to happen now, but
No.
of course you could get a driver's license for 50 cents in South Dakota.
I think I circles back around. So then, I'm trying to think, because we had some other things. I think one thing that was just on this list here, that's completely unrelated, but I thought I'd just touch on it while we're here. I think it's probably one of your questions, Mark, is I guess it kind of goes back to how you met Mom with your car breaking down constantly, but how did you learn to fix things? I think this might be, because today we can just hop on YouTube or something, but how did you learn how to fix stuff? How did you know that you could just put a rag around a couple wires?
Well, see, Mark carried that on. I
Yeah.
took things apart and put them back together again. Yeah. And I guess it's because when I had the Ford and even the Chrysler had some mechanical problems, I had it fixed. And it wasn't done right. And so I thought, well, I better fix it myself. And like I said earlier, after I met Ken, my half-brother, he tells me that he's Hazel, my mother, my birth mother, was part Danish. And he said the Danes are creative and so on, and so I guess it's just in the blood. But that's how I, just by guessing by gosh.
I know we all have some level of it. And I know, especially you, Mark. Just kind of came back around for you after all the years, but
I'd go to the library, and get a car book or something, and they had that sort of stuff. And
Okay.
read up, and then I'd go see what I could do with it.
Okay. Well, it seems like when you worked at the appliance store, you would go in the back and talk to one of the service techs if you needed to fix something. And
Well, yeah, and I did. We take trade-ins,
that's right.
and so we get these ancient. Most of them were whirlpools that were sold, and whirlpool is a very easy machine to work on. And so they'd have somebody come out, technical people come out from Sioux Falls for the service people. I'll go down and just kind of watch and listen. And I had access to all the service books. And so when we take in, whirlpools haven't changed yet. And so an old one was like a new one. So anytime we junk one, we had all these parts in the basement. And so I would get one of those old washers, and I'd go down in the evening, turn it outside, and replace parts with with parts that were good off of another washer. Mm-hmm. Put them together because we sold those old washers. And so if we made a $25 trade-in, we'd put them on the floor for $50. Well, we had all these airmen that didn't have a lot of money and were transit, and they couldn't afford a new washing machine, so they'd buy these used washers and dryers from us. And I would get a double commission for selling a used one.
Oh.
There was my motivation. So I put my time and labor into it, so there was no cost involved except the parts, which cost us nothing. So that was part of my.
Okay.
yeah, we bought a lot of our, well, pretty much any appliances I've bought, well, washers and dryers, that's how, because after hearing, growing up, hearing stories about how they haven't really changed them over the last 60, 70 years, basically. We would just go buy, there's a place down in Denver that does the same thing. They sell new appliances, bring the old ones back, recondition them, put them back together, and sell them for a third of the cost, yeah.
Easy to wash. Well, when we lived in Linda Vista, every so often the dryer or something would give up, and I'd lay it on it in the hallway and crawl under it and clean it and put it back together, put a new belt on it, and away we go. Still sitting up here, we just changed from up there to down here. We bought a new dryer.
Yeah.
And took Joan's relatively new Maytag washer and put it down here and put the old one up there. They're still going.
I know we've all had our fair share of tearing apart different things.
After the 4th of July and all that stuff was going on, we took clothes up there and washed and dried them up there.
Yeah, nice to exercise. Yeah, I think probably the next thing, I think we kind of, as far as your timeline goes, we got you up into Rapid City, which kind of brings us to kind of a next phase a little bit. And this was something we missed and that you might want to know about in there, Mark. Yeah. But that kind of gets to the time when Beth and Mark came along, and that early time in your life. And at that point, you were working, is that when you were working at the appliance store, or am I getting the time wrong? And when you were in Rapid City? Or were you still working in the bakery?
I was doing what?
When you first moved to Rapid City?
I was a baker.
And then at some point you were working at the appliance store.
Moved me to, and then I went to sales.
Okay.
Went to the RCA whatever television and Whirlpool whatever washer dryer freezers whatever made $1. And of course that was the very start of color TV. And with the round tubes and the 23-inch framed out round tube TVs, and they were hotter than pancakes. And we took them, and we delivered. And we'd set them up, and then I would go out in the evening, and about the only thing that was in color then was sports and cartoons. And so I'd go out to these people's houses in the evening, at night, and show them how to set up their TV, because you had to mess with them and set up their TV and get the colors right and so on. And you do this and you do that, watching the Flintstones.
Yeah.
And people my age now, then, but that's what we had to do. But there's still a lot of black and white.
You'd have to do that because that's the only time a color program would be on, basically, right? That'd be the only time a color program would be on for you to
Yeah,
do
pretty
that.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. They put on some of the big shows, the hit shows and so on, but most of the TV shows were black and white still.
Yeah.
The bowl games and all that would be on. And I went out on New Year's Day and showed people how to run their TVs. Learned a lesson there that we could put on the video, that you've seen where the TV store, where the appliance store was, is now a bar.
Yeah.
It's the old Ford garage, but it's out there on the west end of Main Street. And that's where the Native Americans would walk toward home, because before the flood, all their housing was down along the Rapid Creek, which wasn't too far away. And so they would go from the bar and stagger past the appliance store. And we had all glass windows, and they'd stagger by and then they'd go on their way. And right before Christmas, this guy walks in the front door in a shaggy, long coat with a bad shirt and bad jeans and bad shoes. And I thought, this guy's been in the bar. And he says, I want to look at color TV. Well, I was doing nothing, and we're just about out of color TVs. And I said, well, we don't have a lot to show. I can show you my demonstrator model. And I said, that's only $399, and we can set you up on payments. And he said, no. He said, I don't want that. He said, show me your book. Can you order one? I said, yeah, I'll get one out of Sioux Falls. And so we're going through the book, and I'm just kind of flipping pages. And he said, that one. And it was a color TV stereo combination, $1,500.
Oh.
He said, that one. I said, that's $1,500. Can you have it by New Year's Day? I said, I think I can. I picked up the phone and called Sioux Falls. Yeah, we've got one. And I said, I need some money down. He said, I'll give you $500. And I said, okay, it's yours. And so when the guy wrote his check, it was J. Ambrose Horgan. He owned all the big banks in the Black Hills. And he looked like something that crawled out from under the door. So never judge somebody.
No. So you would have got commission off that?
Oh yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Oh yeah, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
I was the only salesperson. I mean, the manager made sales, but generally he would get to the closing, and then I got to close.
So
They treated me real well. The only reason I left was that they were building the missiles in Rapid City, and they, up there north where there's fast food stores and stuff up there where the interstate is now. The interstate was not there. And they had a big lot that was several blocks long and several blocks wide, and they all had 14 by 32 trailers, travel trailers. And that's where the missile people lived. And they said, July of 63, we're gone. We're done here and we're gone. And everybody in Rapid said, no way. You can't, you're not going fast enough building these missiles. The weather was bad. That day, I drove up past there and that trailer park was half empty. And the next day, the other half was gone. They went to Kimball and they went to Cheyenne. Kimball, Nebraska, and Cheyenne, Wyoming. And the economy went, and I'm looking, because all of a sudden sales, and I mean, I still had the income, but the commission was gone, and that's where I really made my bread and money. And we just bought a house out there on Hooper Avenue, a new house. And so, I had a few payments.
and some kids, and
Mark and Beth.
yep. So that's why. So that's when you decided to move. I guess that's the next step. So what? Well, you ended up in Torrington, but how did you end up in Torrington?
Well, again, my father got me a couple, 3 jobs, and so he had stopped bouncing around after, I kind of dropped when I left home in Garrison, but he went out to Basin, Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Gillette, Wyoming, and then he finally got into Hartung's Incorporated, which was what I got in, and Mark got in. And they were looking for somebody, and we had a store in Morrill, Nebraska. So he got to run this store. He got to be his own store, of course, for the corporation, but he got to be his own store. So I would go to Morrill, Nebraska, and here is what, a couple hour drive or 3 hour drive. It's not a big deal. So we go down like on a holiday, and my father liked to play golf. He played golf all his life, and so I'd go down. I played some golf, and I'd go down and we'd play golf with Walt Muehlberger, who was the big nut in Hartung's Incorporated, and so we played golf. So I got to know him, and then when things went to hell, I started looking around South Dakota. There was nothing there that I either qualified for or wanted to do, and I didn't want to go back East River again where it's hot and smicky. Living out here is a nice place to live. And so my father said, well, they're expanding, they're opening a store in Kimball, Nebraska, or a job in Kimball, Nebraska, so why don't you call Walt? And I called Walt, and he said, well, come down. And we came down, we talked, and he said, well, I'll pay you so much, and he said, you can come down and work for me. And for the first 6 months, they hired a new guy. The guy that was the head guy in Kimball had a wife that was from Clinton, Indiana. And we had bought that store. It was our best store. And next to Scotts Bluff. And he had our best store. And it was an old store run by the Rosenblatt brothers. And we bought that store. And the guy in Kimball took his wife because she'd made an edict. Either we go back east or I go back east. So they went back east. And Dick Taylor.
Okay.
Did you ever meet him?
Maybe.
But Dick Taylor went back east. And so this created an opening in Kimball, and Ron Evelyn, who was working, he was a teacher, and he was working part-time in Torrington. And so they said, go down and manage the Kimball store. Well, there's more money he was making teaching, and so he went to Kimball, and his wife's still there. And he went to Kimball, and he took that store over. And that created an opening for a second guy in Kimball and a second guy in Torrington. So I went to Torrington, and Dan Cantor went to Kimball. And the first 6 months it was, you two get together, and if you like where you are, you can stay, otherwise you can switch.
Mm-hmm.
And he liked Kimball, thank God, and I liked Torrington. And so we got together, and he said, I want to stay in Kimball. He's a big guy. Big voice, big guy, big Nebraska fan. And Nebraska never did anything wrong. And the rest of us that didn't like Nebraska, nevertheless. So he said, I want to stay in Kimball, and I said, you got it. So then that's how we got to Torrington.
So I was 4 years old, but I have this memory that when we moved to Torrington, that you bought a farm truck to move our stuff.
I had a friend, Toastmaster friend in church, that kind of dabbled. He worked for the Rapid City Daily Journal as a distribution manager. So he was never hurting for money, but he had to fiddle around with little things. He made name badges, and he bought and sold old vehicles. And he had this 48 International Harvester 2-ton truck, no box. So I went out and I had an old Dodge pickup, 1940 Dodge pickup, that wasn't trusty from there to Torrington. So I went. I said, "Well, will you take my Dodge?" And yeah. So I think I paid $100 for this truck. And then I went out to the junkyard and found a used box, an open box that we bolted onto the back of that truck. And that was how we moved, because it was too much money to have a moving company move us. And we weren't going to get paid to get moved. So we had to do it on our own. And so we took this old truck and we got out of Rapid City and we got as far as Hot Springs. Tire blew, we had to put a new tire on it. And we sat that truck and I finally gave it to somebody to sell on a commission. I don't know what they got out of it.
What year did you move to Torrington?
What's that?
What year did you move to Torrington?
66.
66.
1966.
And that's when you moved into the house on Loma Vista?
No, we moved to a house on Linda Vista.
No, Loma Vista.
Loma Vista,
Loma Vista.
yeah.
That's when you moved to that house.
And that was a little
113
Loma Vista.
Mhm.
And that was an interesting thing too. I was still not a Mason, but a guy named Harry Bowers owned the house. And we were trying to find something, and at that time, Torrington, there was nothing open, and we looked at basement apartments that were filthy, dirty, cold, no view, nothing. We were really up against a wall. We didn't know what to do. And Harry knew Walt, and not Harry, yeah, and Harry knew Walt, and Walt said, well, Bill's looking for a place, and Harry came to me and said, here's what I'm going to do. He says, I've got this house that I'm living in. I built a new house. I'm going to move to that, and you can move into. I want to sell it for so many dollars, and $15,000 or something. It wasn't much, and you can move in, and the first year you pay rent. And if you decide to keep the house at the end of the year, either you move or you keep the house, and if you keep the house, I'll give you half your rent back. Well, down payment.
Mhm.
So that's what we did, and he financed it.
Wow.
And so we stayed there, and then the house got too small, and I went to a church meeting, and this may be the next question, but we went to the church meeting one night, and the gal that owned the house on Linda Vista said, well, I'm getting old, I'm taking care of that big yard, and so on, running up and downstairs, turning on the sprinkler system, and so just too much for me. My arthritis is getting hold of me, and I said, you're going to what? She said, I think I'll sell my house. So the next day I went down to Harry DeBolt, and I said, you list that house, and you said he'd call me. And he went out and talked to this. Now these are Masons talking to Masons, and I'm still not a Mason. But she we went up there, and she said, well, I want this much for it. A new house that was built crappy was the same price, and this is a nice house. And so we said, okay, fine. So she financed it for less interest. I saved $13,000 in interest by buying that thing from her.
And that's the house we all grew up in. Well, I guess me.
Yeah, so that was 74.
That was 74, right before you were born.
Yep.
So, not to mess up
Oh,
timeline.
we're off the rails.
Way
but-
off. Okay. So just talking about the store, something occurred to me that I didn't write down, but you want to talk about the fire?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the old store was one floor, no basement, drop ceiling. I don't know how old it was, and we had just finished the Washington birthday sale. Then you don't do like we do now and have a sale every 25 minutes. You have the sale in the summer, you have the sale after Christmas, and then you clean up with a Washington birthday sale. And that's when you take it, please. And the night we had a JC, I was a JC, and we went to, I was going to a JC convention in Laramie. And we were standing, Walt and I, we closed the store, it was dark. We were standing around a counter of shoes. These were crap shoes. We had them marked at, I think, 50 or 75 cents a pair. We couldn't give them away. And Walt said, what are we going to do with them? And I said, a good fire would be a good idea.
Oh, no.
Not, just jokingly.
It's like all of a sudden FBI comes knocking.
The next day, somebody comes to me from Torrington and said, the store's on fire. I said, don't shit me. And they said, the store's on fire. And I'll never joke about that again.
No.
But what happened was we were neighbors, we were next to a drugstore. Actually, the guy that ran the drugstore was the guy that the house we lived in, Linda Vista, was built for him in 1960.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the fire started there in the old parallel wiring. They think. There was a bank to the south and us to the north. And how they let it happen anyway, but the back, we had a common entry behind the store, one door with a lock on it, and bars in the door. It was a glass door. And you come in that door, and they went this way to the pharmacy and this way to us. And both of our doors had glass doors. The fire started there, got going real good, broke the glass door, swung around behind through that entryway, broke our glass door, and then came into our building like a jet.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the store burned. And that was February, that was Washington's birthday.
It burned down the drugstore as well. And it burned down the drugstore as well.
It took our store, it took the drugstore, took the bank, and it took a hardware store that was behind the bank because we're all close together.
Which is a good chunk of downtown Torrington, yeah.
The only thing that saved our bacon was way back when, the building next to us, there was a firewall between the two of us. And nobody knew it. But there was a firewall between the two of us. The fire couldn't penetrate that wall. They got it down by then. And if they hadn't had a firewall, the whole block would have gone.
Whew.
And when did this happen?
That was 1969. We moved back in 1970.
And where was the store located while they were rebuilding it?
Across the street on Main Street, up 2 doors from the north, across the street. It was an old, it was an empty building.
Wasn't there a bowling alley or something?
There was a bowling alley in the basement.
Okay.
As far as I know, it still is.
I didn't even know that.
Well, it was old handset pins, and I was never down there. There's a door to go down there, but I was never down there. We always had our stuff upstairs. But that's where we were for essentially a year.
Yeah.
While we rebuilt. And that's when we went in and dug a basement and built a essentially fireproof building. Go figure.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because most of downtown Torrington is probably from the 1920s, I would guess. Most of those buildings on that block. But that corner there is...
Well, the Goddard store at the very north end, the roof caved in and they rebuilt that thing.
Yeah.
So, but, yeah, I don't, it happened, it was an electrical problem and it displaced 9 businesses and none of them went out of business.
Wow.
Yeah.
But luckily Main Street at that time was kind of suffering, it was kind of empty. It wasn't then, and it didn't stay that way for a very, very long time.
Yeah. I guess on that note, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is trying to start out a business? Since you ran that store for what, you retired in 2000?
Well, I was there for
right?
35 years.
Yeah.
Advice now? don't.
Well, that was the quickest question we're going to ask.
Because I can't explain it. You know, sometimes the good Lord watches after fools and little children. I'm not sure which one or both. And it was just the start of the internet, and people were saying the internet would be 10% of it penetrate you 10% it would you know, eventually, and it was starting to happen. I was having people come in and say, well, I saw this on the internet, or I can get this on the internet, and so it kind of bit, so I would say to people now, it's a tough go. It's a tough go. It's a really tough go. Rent is high. I've seen people open a business, and I walk in and Mark can do the same thing. Walk in, take a look around, and they got all brand new pictures, they got all fancy stuff, a $3,000 cash register, all kinds of stuff. And you can almost mark your calendar when they're going to be gone.
At one point, downtown put together a almost cooperative store at the end of the street, and they came to you to consult, didn't they?
They didn't come to me for any reason.
Oh,
They got this store through the economic development. And the economic development arm of the chamber. And the chamber kind of burned me a little bit. They wanted red sport coats for the chamber ambassadors. So they came to me, and I shot them a price. It was costing 10. And they didn't buy. They went, I think Scottsbluff, or they went on the internet and got some cheap crap. But, and then they go, as economic development, they go to the state and the feds and get money and get tax relief on this,
it was the Goddard store.
some chain store that wanted to develop move into small towns. And so here's this store carrying some of my lines, and not many, cheaper, nice pictures. Of course, we'd upmodeled, so we were nice, but they were twice our size. And they got into business, and they got a bit, but they got all this stuff, and I got nothing.
So, okay, so I guess I didn't realize, I thought that happened after you had closed, but that was during.
No, that
okay.
was, oh gosh, several years before we closed.
Okay. All right. I get
I
it.
hadn't bought the store yet.
Oh, I didn't, okay.
That was, that's one of those things, and they lasted 3 years and closed. Did I put them out of business? No. They put themselves out of business because they didn't know what the heck they were doing.